All right, welcome to another deep dive where we really try to get to the bottom of the stuff you send us and pull out the key stuff.
Yeah.
So this time, you pointed us to something pretty interesting, David Kadavy's mind management, not time management.
Interesting.
And David, he's a fascinating guy. He's got books on writing, on design, so
Right.
clearly
Definitely knows how to get things done.
yeah, knows how to get things done for sure. And our goal today is to really understand his argument here, why managing our minds is more effective than just managing our time,
Mhm.
and how that actually translates into being more productive
hmm
and unlocking our creative potential.
Yeah, and I think that's a really crucial distinction, especially in today's world. We're constantly bombarded with information,
Yeah.
a million different things competing for our attention, and so
Yeah.
that old adage of just trying to cram more into the same 24 hours, it just doesn't really resonate anymore.
Yeah, it really doesn't work, and we've all heard it right. There are only 24 hours in a day. And so what's the usual fix? It's time management.
Right.
Right? It's the color-coded calendars, the rigid routines, the endless quest for shortcuts,
Yeah.
and then the strategic deployment. No.
Right.
I remember, back in my Silicon Valley days,
That.
it was all about chasing the next productivity app, always looking for that elusive edge.
Hmm.
But you realize eventually that there's this fundamental limit that you just can't seem to break through.
Yeah, you hit a wall. And I think that's the core of the issue, really, is that time management operates on the assumption that time is this kind of consistent and readily available resource
Yeah.
that we can just allocate more effectively. But our mental energy,
Yeah.
our ability to focus, our overall cognitive capacity, those are things that fluctuate constantly
Yeah.
and are much harder to predict.
Yeah, totally. And it's like that kind of brings us to David's own experience here.
Mm.
He talks about this pretty radical move he made. Selling most of his possessions, swapping his Chicago apartment for a life out of suitcases,
Oh, no.
and moving to a country where he barely spoke the language. And this all came about after landing a book deal 6 years prior. Talk about hitting the reset button, huh?
A full-on reset. I mean, it speaks to his commitment
Hmm.
to really focus on that creative endeavor.
Yeah.
Stripping away any of the familiar structures
Yeah.
or potential distractions from his previous life.
Yeah, totally. But even with that intense focus, right,
Yeah.
dedicating huge blocks of time specifically for writing, he hit a wall.
Oh, wow.
Physical pain, that dreaded writer's block. The time was there on the calendar,
Right.
but the words just weren't flowing. That's when he made what seemed like this counterintuitive decision, retreat to Costa Rica, hoping a change of scenery would somehow break the logjam.
Right. Right. And that's a really common experience.
Yeah.
For anyone that's engaged in creative work, you put in the hours, you dedicate the time,
Yeah.
but the progress just isn't there. And that instinct
Mm-hmm.
to just work harder, to put in even more time,
Oh.
often backfires. It can lead to burnout,
Yeah.
even more resistance.
Yeah, totally. And then comes this really interesting turning point. He's having a conversation, just this relaxed conversation in Spanish with this local guy named Diego. And they're just talking about simple things.
Okay.
The sun, the beach, the rain, the sea. And all of a sudden David feels this wave of relaxation, almost this sense of being disoriented. It's like his brain just kind of shifted gears.
It's like he stumbled upon something without even realizing it.
Mm.
That conversation being so far removed from the pressure that he was putting on himself to write, it probably allowed his mind to just decompress
Mm.
and wander a bit. And sometimes that's exactly what's needed. You step away
Yeah.
and you allow those subconscious connections to form.
Yeah, and that led to this key question, and it's something that I think we can all relate to. Why is it that sometimes an entire day's worth of writing or problem solving or learning can happen in like 15 minutes, seemingly out of nowhere,
Right.
while other times hours of intense effort yield absolutely nothing,
Yeah.
Whether it's trying to nail a presentation or master a new skill or make a really tough decision, we've all experienced that feeling of being totally stuck and then suddenly having a breakthrough.
Absolutely. And I think what that points to is that the conditions within our own minds
Mm-hmm.
are the primary driver of creative output.
Mm.
not just the amount of time we clock in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those 15-minute bursts of productivity, they weren't random. They were likely moments where his mind was in this optimal state for that kind of work.
Yeah.
A state that just forcing himself to sit down for hours couldn't guarantee.
Right, right. And so for David, going through that intense experience of writing his first book, that, creativity pressure cooker, it really drove home this idea of needing to manage his mind.
Not just his time. And he realized that this wasn't just about writing. It applied to everything.
Yeah.
Design, starting a business, marketing, picking up new skills, even making big life choices. It's not just about putting in the hours. It's about preparing that mental environment for those creative seeds to actually grow.
Exactly. And I think what he came to understand is that the nature of the work that matters now has kind of evolved. It's less about following this set of predefined steps. And it's more about generating novel and useful solutions to problems. And this requires a different kind of engagement than simply adhering to a schedule.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to this fascinating modern challenge. He uses this great comparison, a NaNoWriMo, where humans try to write a novel in a month, versus NaNoGenmo, where programmers try to get AI to do the same thing.
Interesting.
And even with the most advanced AI, the results are often just,
bizarre.
like that AI-generated sentence about playing with a dog and a dead man,
It just highlights that. Even with immense processing power, AI struggles with that very thing that makes human creativity so powerful, making those unexpected novel connections.
Right, and it shows the limits of a purely algorithmic, time-driven approach to creative work. Human creativity isn't just about, processing information. It involves intuition, emotion, and that ability to connect these seemingly unrelated ideas.
Right. So, okay, let's dig into this a little bit deeper. David, he argues that this traditional view of time as a production unit, it's deeply embedded in our culture. And it goes way back to the principles of Taylorism and scientific management. I mean, think about it. Our alarms blaring in the morning, navigation apps giving us arrival times down to the minute, filling out timesheets at work, even our e-readers telling us how long it'll take to finish a chapter. We are constantly quantifying our lives in terms of time.
Right, and that Tayloristic model, while it certainly had its place in optimizing physical labor back in the industrial era, it operates on this assumption of a direct linear relationship between the time invested and the output produced. It basically treats human workers like interchangeable parts in a machine, focusing on efficiency of movement within the given time frame.
Yeah. But even Frederick Taylor himself, the father of scientific management, he understood that there are limits to this. He recognized that you can't just pack every single minute with work. You also need to factor in these prescribed rest periods. There's a point where putting in more time or effort just doesn't yield this proportional increase in output, diminishing returns.
Right.
And beyond that, there's a point of negative returns where pushing harder actually makes things worse.
Yeah, precisely. Our mental resources, they're not like some simple production unit. They're finite, they can be depleted. And pushing ourselves beyond our capacity leads to fatigue, impaired cognitive function, and ultimately a decrease in the quality of our work.
Right. And so this intense focus on time as this primary value has led to what David calls time worship.
Oh, interesting.
He quotes Mark Manson here, saying that a God value kind of sits at the top of our value hierarchy. It shapes how we see everything else. And for those who worship time, constantly filling every gap in their schedule, doing more in less time, that becomes the ultimate measure of their worth.
Right, that becomes their metric for everything.
Yeah, and so this time worship, it can manifest in some pretty irrational behaviors. This relentless pursuit of saving every possible second, often at the expense of other really important aspects of life, like rest and genuine connection.
Yeah, and he gives some really relatable examples of this. I think.
Yeah, like that exit strategy app for New Yorkers. That tells you exactly which subway car to board so you can be closest to your exit at the next station. Or his college neighbor who literally ran everywhere all the time because he was convinced it saved time. And it's like, I mean, what are we sacrificing in this constant frantic rush to shave off, a few seconds here and there?
Yeah, what are those opportunity costs that come with this hyper-optimization of time,
Yeah.
becomes so focused on efficiency
Right.
that we miss out on the value
Yeah.
of those unplanned moments, those serendipitous encounters, those opportunities for quiet reflection
Yeah.
that can really fuel our creativity.
Yeah, and the consequences can be pretty significant. And he points out that a huge percentage of working adults in America are consistently getting less than 6 hours of sleep.
Wow.
All in the name of, squeezing more into their already packed days. And we know that chronic sleep deprivation, it doesn't just stifle creativity. It has serious repercussions for our overall health and cognitive function.
It becomes this vicious cycle. We sacrifice sleep in the pursuit of more time to productivity, but the resulting cognitive impairment and health problems actually undermine our productivity in the long term. It's like we're borrowing from our future well-being for this perceived immediate gain that often doesn't materialize.
Yeah, totally. And he introduces this really interesting and somewhat counterintuitive idea of saving time by actually doing nothing in the present. Like building up a nest egg of time that can pay off in the future. It's about recognizing that downtime, that seemingly unproductive space in our day, can be absolutely crucial for our creativity and our overall mental well-being.
Yeah, that concept of a time nest egg is such a powerful reframe. It encourages us to see unused time not as wasted time, but as a valuable investment in our future cognitive capacity and our potential for breakthroughs. And it acknowledges the vital role of rest and recovery and reflection in that whole creative process.
Yeah. And when it comes to creative thinking specifically, he really emphasizes that the amount of time spent just doesn't have this direct correlation with the quality of the ideas that emerge. You could spend the exact same number of hours writing a novel that ends up being a complete flop, as you would writing one. That becomes a massive bestseller. The key difference isn't the hours. It's the quality and the resonance of the underlying ideas.
Absolutely. The output of creative work is far less predictable and controllable by sheer effort and time spent compared to, say, a repetitive physical task. That groundbreaking idea can suddenly surface, seemingly out of the blue, with no direct link to immediate hours of focused work.
Right, and he brings in the research of neuroscientists, observing, those aha moments in the brain. People can be totally stuck on a problem, and then in a single instant, the solution just appears, and you can literally see that moment of insight light up in their brains, and it takes practically no time at all. Yet it happens because of all the prior experiences, the accumulated knowledge, and that subconscious processing that's been going on.
Right.
He quotes Marian Anderson here. He said, "What has appeared useless labor for days becomes fruitful at an unpredictable moment."
That's a great quote, and it really encapsulates the often mysterious nature of that whole creative process, all that seemingly unproductive time, the exploration of dead ends, the subconscious rumination. It's all contributing to that eventual flash of insight. It's the preparation that allowed for illumination.
Yeah. So the real takeaway here is that productivity in today's world, in this era of knowledge work and creativity, it isn't about typing faster or cramming more meetings into your schedule. It's about actively cultivating the right conditions within your mind for those valuable thoughts and ideas to emerge. It's fundamentally about mind management, not just time management.
Yeah, it's a shift in focus from those external constraints of the clock to that internal landscape of our mental states, our fluctuating energy levels, and our intricate cognitive processes.
Right. Now, David, he does acknowledge that there are existing productivity methods out there that go beyond this simple time management. Things like the Eisenhower matrix for prioritizing tasks, the Pareto principle focusing on the 80-20 rule, and the philosophy of essentialism, which is all about, doing less but better. These all recognize that not all time is created equal, and that focusing on the right things is crucial.
Right. And these methods represent, I think, a positive step forward. They recognize the importance of prioritization and focused effort. However, they still largely operate within the framework of managing tasks within the finite constraints of time. Mind management really takes this deeper dive, addressing the underlying mental states that either enable or hinder effective work.
Yeah, totally. And he shares his own aha moment related to this. When he realized that his best and most productive writing consistently happened while he was in Medellin, Colombia, during his winter escapes from the Chicago cold. Suddenly the physical location,
Right.
change in environment, played this surprisingly significant role in his creative output.
And it wasn't just about escaping the Chicago winter. It was the entire shift in environment and daily routine that fostered this more conducive mindset for his writing.
Right. And this leads us to this important concepts of divergent and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is that expansive brainstorming phase where you're generating lots of ideas, what Robert Frost famously called a feat of association. And then the convergent thinking is the more focused process of taking those raw ideas and actually refining them, selecting the best ones and producing something tangible. Both are absolutely essential parts of the overall creative process.
Yeah, the creative process is really this dynamic interplay between these two distinct modes of thought. Divergence opens up this realm of possibilities, while convergence brings focus and structure and transforms those possibilities into tangible results.
Yeah, and the neuroscience behind those aha moments is really fascinating. Research by Kunios and Beeman shows this distinct surge of activity, almost like a flash on the right side of the brain at the exact moment of insight.
Wow.
And they use this great analogy of solving a maze,
Okay.
where hitting a dead end suddenly reveals a beam me up Scotty portal that instantly transports you to the solution. It's clearly not this linear, time-dependent process.
It's really that sudden flash of insight that underscores the nonlinear nature of these creative breakthroughs. It's not about steadily and methodically progressing through some logical sequence. It's about those unexpected leaps of connection that were previously invisible.
Right. And so he used this helpful analogy of light bulbs and wires in the brain. Our more obvious, our well-trodden connections are like brightly lit bulbs that can sometimes actually prevent us from seeing the dimmer, less obvious connections that can lead to those truly novel and innovative ideas. So the goal becomes to think of those less obvious connections more often.
Yeah, our existing knowledge and those neural pathways that we access frequently, they can sometimes create these cognitive ruts, making it more challenging to explore these and unconventional associations.
And true creativity often lies in forging those less traveled mental pathways. Yeah. And he then dives into the significant impact of our natural circadian rhythm and the accumulation of sleep debt on our energy levels throughout the day, including that notorious afternoon slump.
Yeah.
He mentions, cultures that have embraced the practice of siestas and the tendency of many high-performing individuals, from, violinists to writers to composers, to concentrate their most intense and demanding work in the morning hours. Expert